Alright, everything seems to be set up over here. Let's see if I can nail this transition. And it seems like we're live. Alright. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Richard Shrew, and today we're here with the start of what I'm hoping to do as a regular series. Today we're going to be doing a debate, a chat between me and Toby here. How you doing, pal?
I'm doing fine.
Awesome. Thank you for agreeing to do this, by the way. Really looking forward to it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking up two countries, playing a light versus game here, and discussing politics in the meanwhile there. And having talked with him before here, him and I got a little bit of an idea as to our respective political alignments, and we're going to be discussing economic systems going into this year. So that should be interesting. So who do you feel like playing, pal?
I'm kind of just waiting off of you, really.
Okay. Let's see here. Thank you, by the way, Drunk. Really appreciate that. I feel like the Soviet Union is a must for an economics politics thing for Hoi 4. You know, I actually agree with that. I'll run Russia here.
Oh, well then, I gotta beat the United States then.
Oh, okay. All right. This could be cool. Alrighty. So, let's delve right on in. And do we want to do historical focuses for this or no?
It's up to you, man.
Sounds good. Alright. So, I'll go a historical and see what happens. Alrighty.
Oh, ahistorical.
Yeah, right. It's going to be interesting. So, if you want, I don't want to necessarily put words in your mouth here, but if I recall, you said that you were, in the context of our economics debate here, you were a mixed economy liberal? Or am I misunderstanding? Yeah? Okay.
That's a pretty decent way of putting how I view the economy.
Okay, so your basic idea then is that when you're... Oh, you're still living in here?
Yeah.
It's all good. So, yeah, my chat's already aware. I'm pretty much a known communist at this point in time here. I usually fancy myself as a neo-Marxist because I'm a little more nuanced in my views there, and I don't necessarily think that, Karl Marx was correct in every aspect of what he put forward there. But that's actually why I figured that this would be an interesting debate for the two of us to have here, because since you're coming from a mixed economy standpoint, it could be interesting to discuss where you think that, market regulations should begin and end, because that's my understanding with mixed economy, right? You do believe that there should be some system of capitalism, but you don't necessarily think that it has to be unregulated, if I'm following correctly?
Okay, how I view it is that
Mm-hmm.
there are some, like, the government should just have regulation, but but the level of regulation depends on what aspect of the economy it is.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, that seems like an excellent place to start. What areas of the economy do you feel like should be regulated?
I 100% believe that pharmaceuticals should be regulated heavily.
Okay.
As you know, the EpiPen crisis, of where EpiPen was about a couple $100s, and then I believe it was Walgreens that put out a kind of a store brand version, or a cheaper version, which was still over $100.
Yeah, it was, and you also have other instances that you point to that I'm aware of, like Valiant, for example, and Martin Shkreli, who engaged in price gouging practices there. I can understand. Are there any other areas that you think that would really benefit from market regulation?
I guess some areas would, like, possibly car dealerships. That's an area where it's a little iffy. You can't buy directly from the dealership. You have to always buy from a car dealership, and even then, that is very monopolized because of how, I guess, the zoning and how the setup is for those dealerships, and how established dealerships can basically have a monopoly over an area.
Okay. So, the other thing I wanted to ask about here is, do you believe only in regulation, or do you believe in nationalization for any of these areas that you were talking about so far?
Some areas I believe in nationalizing, specifically the like the healthcare industry.
Mm-hmm.
I actually prefer nationalization of that. I believe Obamacare is actually a good idea. It's just that the Republicans messed it up, trying to get it through the House. And a few other areas I believe would benefit greatly. trying to think of a few off my top of my head. I can't really think of a few specifics.
That's okay. And while you're considering there, just to give everyone a heads up, since it was asked in the chat here, the individual that we're talking with here is one of the viewers from my Discord. If you have any interest in potentially discussing or debating with me at some point in time, feel free to hop in my Discord, and you can hit me up in a private message on there, and I'll be happy to schedule with you. You know, and we can work out what it is we could talk about and everything else. And yeah, so picking up from there, if you don't know of any others that you'd necessarily, you know, go towards nationalization on, that's okay, because we can, you know, branch into another area that I'm very curious about here, because so far I've just been trying to probe and get ideas to how you want to treat the, you know, economy generally there. But I'm also looking at it from a larger philosophic angle here for myself, and wondering, out of curiosity, do you believe that... okay, actually, let me approach this differently. Do you think that defense contractors and organizations like those should be nationalized?
Yes, because
Okay.
it's the weird field where defense contractors are basically like the army, because the army is supposed to defend the nation.
Right.
Well, defense contractors are doing that, but they're not really, in my opinion, supposed to. It's supposed to either be the Army or the National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you would nationalize defense contractors, you could put a regulation on them, and you could kind of start to incorporate them into the military. They could still be private companies to a... Well, not really private companies. They could be companies that can also contract out to civilians, but they would be under the regulation of the Army and the overall federal government. You could potentially maybe give them to state governments, so that way the states could use them as a supplement to the National Guard for issues that require that don't really require the National Guard, but require something more bigger than the police force.
Okay. By the way, just to...
If that makes sense.
No, I understand where you're coming from so far. And like I said, mostly I've just been probing to figure out your general views here so far. You good with starting, by the way?
Real quick. Okay, now I am.
Okay, I'm going to keep it at 2 speed here, so don't worry. You know, it gives us time to chat here. So,
Okay.
on that note, I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about capitalism as a system. So far, it sounds like you're in favor of, you know, regulation, partial nationalization for certain areas, most of them dealing with basically either humanitarian issues or defense issues, which I can kind of understand. So, for example, you talked about the idea of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry because you feel like the actions, and I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you feel that the price gouging is an immorality, right?
Correct.
Okay. And with defense, it's a matter of, you know, basically the army is supposed to be the one managing these in the first place, so having this undertaken by a private corporation is a conflict of interest situation, if I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. So, my question for you is, what is the purpose of an economic system?
And oh, that's a good question. An economic system. The purpose of an economic system, depending on which one it is. For capitalism, is to have corporations make money and to somewhat exploit the people, the consumer. Economic system that follows the line of communism is where everyone is equal and there is no like homelessness or no like poverty. A mixed economy is supposed to share the best of qualities, make sure that everyone is being treated fairly, and let the companies make a profit if it's not hurting the consumer.
Okay, so let me delve a little bit further into this then. Do you think that, again, I don't want to be too leading with my questions here, so let me think how I'd put this here. Do you believe that when it comes to the capitalistic portion of your mixed economy, for instance, your mixed economy model here, that the purpose of the economy as a whole is to provide value to people?
Yes.
Okay, because that's an important thing to undertake there as well. I've always approached economics from the understanding that the entire point of any economic philosophy is in order to provide value to the consumer base, the generally people in essence. So from that understanding, from that position there, my question is, how do you square the problem of inequity? Is inequality a good thing?
Inequality is a thing that humans have dealt with for generations and for years.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been very prevalent in the economic situation as well, in the economic scene.
Right.
We can see this as with slavery. We can see this with serfdom.
So
Indentured servants.
you're familiar with historical materialism?
I might be. I just don't. I've never heard that term before.
Oh, sorry. It's I might even be butchering the name there, but basically the idea of the evolution of society through the modes of production. I was just curious whether or not that's what you were referencing there by discussing the transition from slavery to feudalism to capitalism, and then going forward from there.
I've heard of that, but that's not where I was taking it.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Please do continue. By the way.
Well, I don't know if I am. But, anyways.
It's okay.
So, and you look at it, inequality has always been there.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to say it, but for the South, it was something that the South needed in the early years. The South needed it just due to how their economy was styled. And inequality is not needed. You can have a perfectly equal society and still have the producer still make a profit.
That's interesting. So equal in what way then in that case? Because I was talking about income inequality. What kind of equality are you?
I'm kind of referencing income equality, I guess, to a degree, but I'm just also referring to like inequality in general that has been faced by people.
Okay, so you're talking about like political inequalities, like enfranchisement, the vote, that sort of thing as well. In that case.
Yeah, I guess I'm incorporating that a little.
Okay, so my question would be then, in that case, even taking aside the complexities of political equality there, when you're dealing with economic inequality, income inequality or wealth inequality in either situation there, because they are two separate things, but they're intrinsically linked, is there a benefit to having... sorry, thank you for following, Spitfire. Greatly appreciate that. But yes, do you believe that there is a value to having income or wealth inequality in an economic system?
I don't think there's any value to that, because if at one point it can help the economy, but in reality it just hurts the economy, because then you have the wealth invested in a certain few. And if those certain few make mistakes or they, mess up in any sort of way, the economy can come crashing down. While if the economy is equally distributed and the income is equally distributed, you won't have that. A certain few individuals could have hindrances, but the economy overall wouldn't take a big hit. Because of that, the economy could still continue and possibly even grow because of that. And so if you have the distribution of income, the economy won't really take that big of an impact.
Wait, so I think I might be misunderstanding you here slightly. Just to be sure I'm aware. So you're saying that you're not in favor of income inequality, or was there some nuance there that I missed?
I'm in favor of income equality.
Oh, equality, not inequality.
Correct.
Okay, well, that actually really leads me to a major question here. If you're in favor of if you're in favor of income equality, then why have any capitalistic mode inside the mixed economy that you're proposing here? Why not go further towards a more socialistic, or even fully communistic model as your end goal in that case?
Because no matter how much you push or how much you shove, there will always be remnants of capitalism. If you look at a fully communistic style like the USSR, there was always like the wealthier section, which was a capitalist, or you have the black market, which is capitalistic in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And to appease, I guess, the people, you could have a capitalistic style, just regulate that income heavily, like have more taxes on it, or place greater taxes on that.
That's interesting. So you're saying that no matter what, there's always going to be some there's always going to be some capitalistic elements of a society.
Yes, no matter how hard you try or try to exterminate it, there will always be capitalistic leanings or doings in an economy, either legally or illegally.
Interesting. So my question would be then, what if you were to completely? Okay, let me put this in a different way. Do you think that the mentality behind that could also be cross-applied to former economic systems, as in, you have feudal societies that claim that there will always be an aristocracy and that that will never end, and that perhaps a mode of economic development where capitalistic elements are basically wiped out is just something that we haven't necessarily, come across as of yet?
Potentially, because you have to remember a lot of, hey, looking at Europe, their economy is very, very integrated with capitalism. Germany, Britain, but Britain's soon to be cut out, but that's a totally different area.
Right.
And France and Russia, well, not really Russia, but they're all integrated with one another because of capitalism. And
right. Okay.
we could potentially come to that. We probably don't have the necessary mindset, because currently there's a lot of people who are divided over issues and they like to throw terms and names at them. So is there a potential that we haven't reached that? Yes, but kind of going back to the feudal, how monarchies and the aristocracy, you have that because of like Bill Gates and all. They're like that very high end with all the money. Donald Trump could be pointing to that because a very wealthy man, he holds the power, still kind of making money off of the power he holds. Look at Britain, monarchy. However, that's a little different issue, but still, there's still a monarchy.
I think I'm following what you're saying. Do you draw a distinction between an aristocracy, basically royalism and that sort of thing, and capitalism? Especially, well, basically a feudalistic model and the aristocracy that goes with a feudalistic model. Do you draw a distinction between that and capitalism, especially as we define it today?
Yeah, there is a line, but the line has become blurred because you look at that, the wealthy elite also still holds a lot of power. However, within a capitalistic society, people who don't have power can become rich and then have power, or people who have power aren't always rich.
That's actually interesting. So, speaking on the nature of power within a capitalist society in that case there as well. Oh, is there something in the background?
People keep joining.
What? Oh, the Discord?
Yes.
Are they hopping into our channel?
I believe so.
I didn't even see anyone here. I'm trying to see if there's somewhere we can potentially head off towards here. I don't really have anything set up. Well, we'll roll with it for right now. In the meanwhile. So, I'm trying to remember my point now. Wow, that threw me off. Damn, I feel really bad now. We were discussing aristocracy and how it relates to capitalism, right?
Yes.
Okay. And... oh! Political power within the nature of a capitalist society. Okay, so... you mentioned the idea that, political power ends up being aggregated, as a result of capitalistic models towards, people, but you still have a model where people can basically monopolize political power within their system. Like, do you agree with the idea that people who engage successfully in a capitalistic model and are able to monopolize different, market sectors are able to amass undue power and influence relative to the rest of the body politic there in order to basically control legislation, policy, and everything else inside of a country?
Yeah, I believe that is happening. I just don't agree with that, though, in general. Like, I agree that, yes, it's happened, but I disapprove of that.
Okay, so if you disapprove of that, then how will that necessarily change in a mixed economy model as opposed to one that's more egalitarian with income and wealth distribution?
With that, the sectors that still with that, they'll probably put in with legislature that would deny the right to do that unless fines. you can say yes, we do have that. However, look at Congress. We have lobbyists. We have the NRA lobbying. We have, hotel companies lobbying. We have oil companies lobbying. And that would require Congress and all for the first steps to move to the system, but to make sure that they ban that, and to make sure that if companies tried to partake in that, there would be heavy fines placed on them to discourage companies with the threat of possible nationalization of those companies. But that would include healthcare or pharmaceutical companies, because they would automatically be nationalized, or with the personal defense or private contractors, because they would also be nationalized automatically.
That's interesting. So you're saying basically that in a mixed economy model like you're proposing, when it comes to the distribution of political power, especially how it relates to the influence of economic power, by having legal penalties like fines, nationalization, other threats of that nature, you think that you'd be able to counteract the influence of corporations, for example, in pushing legislation that would benefit their bottom line? If I'm understanding correctly?
Yes, I would believe that would be able to help, because if you have a big enough penalty, companies are always looking for that profit, and if you actually do put a big enough of a penalty on it, that would make companies realize that we shouldn't do this, or such and such would happen, and that would hurt them overall.
Interesting. So how would you handle the idea of corruption within the ranks of that enforcement? Because we have like you said, a similar model in the United States as it is. We have antitrust laws. We have all kinds of other modes of fines and other things that are able to punish corporations. Yet they've still been able to exceed all of those limitations that we place on them, and gain and amass such a level of power that basically we have systems that are literally designated too big to fail in many market sectors, banking being one of the most obvious ones there.
I would believe that would need to be set up an outside committee that could overlook this, because yes, we have committees, but those are currently influenced, and a lot of them are civilian positions that usually aren't elected and concern more civilian businessmen. If you could have a committee that is set up by people like from Congress or from other aspects that actually know what they're doing and know about this and that, then you could have the law be truly enforced. Because currently there are some laws that people don't know how to actually enforce, and so people can easily break them, or how there are little loopholes that companies can get around.
Right, but I feel like one of the issues that you'd end up running into with just the idea of an independent committee there is, what if you have corruption in the committee in the same way that Congress is supposed to be an independent body that's regulating these areas? What happens when you have, corruption in that body at that point? Do you create, like, another commission or to watch over the commission?
Yeah, just keep creating. No. No. That is a funny idea, though, which actually has been done and has ultimately and utterly failed. At that point, it would probably be the interest of the president to take a look into it, and the president, because he would overall be their boss, and in the weird quasi way that America works, and so he would be looking at it. If he sees corruption, he can file a charge to the Supreme Court. That way they can review the case. And because of its corruption in the federal government, it will be one of the cases that will be expedited above others. Yes, sad to say, other cases won't be seen that may have been, in the process for a long time. However, it will be expedited due to the nature of it. And if need be, the president can have them be arrested and held until the trial happens, or if there's overwhelming evidence, he can have them arrested.
Okay, so what you're proposing then is the use of the executive branch's authority to arrest people when you feel that, or when an elected president feels that they've violated these rules by getting Congress to pass legislation in their favor? If I'm understanding correctly?
If there's obvious signs of corruption, yes.
Well, what if that corruption is legalized? Like, what if you have a congressional body that allows for these actions to be undertaken? Or let's say that you have your independent review commission here that ends up just, through the same, acts of, and not all, corruption is just, monetary. You can have instances where people basically corrupt systems by putting people in charge of them that are sympathetic to the ideology to begin with. So, for instance, when you look at the study of economics today, especially within universities, it's made up of a lot of people that have generally, anti-Marxist backgrounds in economics specifically, because a lot of these same people also have very close working relationships and, have the personal ideology and temperament to be more pro-capitalistic. And that also comes about from the fact that there's a lot of money in these areas just from independent think tanks and that sort of thing. Like, no one's getting, a check cut to them just for one straight opinion per se, but it's an entire system that's, corrupted from the bottom up, you could say, in a sense, if you're ideologically opposed to this, just because of people's personal ideologies flowing into a profitable workplace.
That's dang. Okay, that's good. Okay.
Sorry, if that was a little bit too like, I can break down that further. Sorry, I don't want to like overwhelm you here.
Oh no, it's fine. I had to be on my toes here.
It's okay.
The president ultimately has the power to veto.
Right.
He also has the power to appoint the officials. And so he could have the committee. So he could appoint the people to be part of the committee.
Mm-hmm.
The committee won't be necessarily chosen by the Senate or House. Like, the people within them, like, they can't nominate someone from it. The president has to do it. And
Okay.
the vetting process will be through multiple offices with multiple departments of like defense and all that, to make sure that the person is appropriate for the job. Basically, a much better vetting process than we have now. And the president, if there's legislator that kind of borders the line, the president can veto it or pocket veto it. Or if he does sign a law, the Supreme Court, this will be another expedited case where the Supreme Court will be to look at it, and then they'll be to overturn it or not.
Okay, so far I've seen the presidency being utilized for a lot of this thing here. I can get to the judiciary in a second there, because there's another aspect to that. But looking at just dealing with the, executive office as a counter to deal with a lot of these mechanisms you're bringing up in your mixed economy model here, what do you do about the fact that our presidency right now requires a lot of outside funding just to get elected, more so than any other political office? Literally tens of millions of dollars in order to run ads and everything else of that nature across multiple states. And that's just in the United States. You have similar issues when you're dealing with, campaigns pretty much in any modern democracy with any notable amount of population. It's going to cost money in order to get yourself out there. Like, that's how you end up with a lot of, political corruption as we might see it in a lot of ways anyway. It's not that, someone's cutting a check for this particular guy, but it's that they have to align themselves with certain interested parties and lobbying groups, in certain interested, groups in essence, in order to raise the funds in order to get elected. And those groups are usually ones that they're somewhat ideologically aligned with in the first place. So, for example, if you have someone that is, anti-regulation, for instance, that runs for president there, that might become a very, profitable fundraising move for him at that point, because you have all these groups that already have money. And even in a mixed economy model, you're going to have all these private entities that are amassing wealth that they can then donate in order to leverage it into political power and influence with the presidency at that point.
So, one of the first steps that'll have to be taken is to basically overhaul the electoral system.
Okay.
Namely, you look at it now, the Electoral College. That will either have to be really overhauled or just basically be abolished with.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is, in my opinion, and I believe you might share the same views, a corrupt body.
Yeah,
a corrupt system.
I agree. I'm not big on it.
Yeah, most Americans aren't either. We can look at like Al Gore. We can look at Hillary Clinton. This presidency, within 2 decades, you had the popular vote lose to the Electoral College vote.
Completely true. That's absolutely true. But even if you overhaul the system there, that doesn't necessarily... it does change some aspects of, the politic there. I worked briefly in state-level politics. one of the things that you're still going to run into at that point is the fact that you're going to need money in order to run ads. And now, because you have the popular vote in place, it's going to cost that much more because you change the dynamics of where you advertise. Right now, a lot of the advertising that's done is in specific key states that generally have a lower voter to generally lower voting population than some of the other states like New York and California. New York and California, Texas as well, are pretty solidly, aligned states there politically. But meanwhile, states like Ohio have a smaller population than those and are more likely to flip one way or the other. So now you're going to end up running more ads in, states like New York, especially New York City, and Texas. You're probably going to end up running them in Houston, LA. These are very expensive areas to run them in. How are you still going to square the circle of the fact that you're going to need money in order to run these campaigns? And how is that not going to have a corrupting influence on the process?
At that point, Congress would have to change the laws of, I guess, donations and ad running and all of that. They have done it in the past, however, they've been very ineffective. They basically need to square down and basically, I guess, make them illegal to run. Because the
So you'd outlaw campaign ads in that case?
Yes. Because what better way to connect or to influence the voters than campaigning? Yes, maybe the incumbent president couldn't do it, but he could have advisors or close friends of him do it. And, still continue along with that while he's still in office. I believe the president shouldn't really campaign as much either because he has a job to do. He's supposed to be doing it. And that could show the American people that he's more dedicated than just trying to get reelected. And more so, you have people campaigning and actually doing these personal visits would definitely sway the vote, because instead of just running an ad or smear campaigns, they're actually coming out and going to these people and meeting them and having an interaction with the populace in the United States.
That's actually very interesting. So you're saying that you would outlaw campaign ads totally in order to be more in favor of people basically going around and meeting voters. Am I understanding that correctly?
100%. America was founded on the people. How can the people elect someone if they don't know that candidate? What if they only see ads about the candidate, which are very misleading in many cases? So how can they vote for someone like that?
And I can understand that principle, so let me ask you a question then in that case. Do you think that's okay for people to go out and campaign on behalf of a candidate?
If the candidate approves of them, then yes.
Okay. So as it stands right now, we already have grassroots organizations that are set up in order to campaign for people, so I can understand where this model is coming from. But then you run into a different problem, which is that a lot of times these staffers have to be paid because you have people going around, they're driving or, spending their own time, going around and canvassing, campaigning on behalf of these candidates here. And especially if you've gotten rid of political ads there, that means you're going to have a situation where people are going to need, guys on the ground because, let's be honest, a president and one guy can't just go and individually talk to all of his constituency. Even if he were to fly to all the major cities, he's not going to get the exposure that he would need in order to, win any meaningful election. And since you've already outlawed campaign ads, he's going to need people going out on his behalf. So rather than campaign ads, you still are going to have the same problem of fundraising, but now it's going to be a matter of, an army of campaign staffers running around in order to try and canvass for a guy.
And that's a very valid concern. But there's one candidate I know for a fact who ran off of donations and mainly grassroots, Bernie Sanders. Amazing man, loved him.
Yeah, I'm a fan of him as well. Yeah, I can... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the thing there, though, is that he still ran, campaign ads, and you also run into a different problem there. If you try to outlaw campaign ads, is any of the interviews that he did considered a campaign ad, just because of the fact that he was, being interviewed by someone and that sort of thing? Because then you run into a different problem of, well, if you're outlawing even just the ability to, sit in for an interview or anything of that nature, you're going to run into the issue of basically no other means of getting out there than campaign staffers. But if you do allow for people to go in for interviews, but not for, but not run campaign ads, that becomes an illicit thing there. Then that means that anyone who has stronger media connections, and this is an issue that Bernie Sanders even ran into in our relatively more free market system here. He was basically blackballed from mainstream media in a lot of senses. He was not given interviews in a lot of cases, and a lot of times his speeches were not covered, and instead they'd cut to Trump's empty podium. These are issues that you saw within the current economic system we have here, where you have private ownership of media. So how does that circle get squared at that point, if you don't mind my asking?
At that point, and you bring up a very valid point, I would allow interviews, but getting blackballed, I was about to say that we could nationalize the media industry. However, you would come into a point where propaganda, where it would just be pro-American propaganda. Anything bad that America has done would just be blogged. Like BBC, they criticize America from time to time. That would be blogged and all of that. And so you come with this very, very fine line where candidates would have to probably be on a state-supported network where the candidates could be interviewed, people could tune into it, but there would be no one monitoring it. Like, the people would be interviewed and it would be broadcasted directly. There would not be any alterations or that. It would just be a straight broadcasting of interviewers, of broadcasting candidates, hosting political debates. But there would be times where there would be nothing on it, or maybe they would just be replaying past interviews or past debates.
So that's a fairly radical change from how we treat modern journalism. So you're saying that you wouldn't have investigative journalism take place at that point?
Oh, no. So what I'm saying is that the journalism industry would still be private, but there would be a nationalized channel or a nationalized outlet where like smaller candidates could get their voice out if they were blackballed or blacklisted from mainstream. So the government would be able to help get them recognized, and that would be solely 100%. They have to do it because that is how the system is created.
So you'd have a nationalized channel in essence, and I'm assuming you're not talking about PBS, which is just publicly subsidized, but instead something that's run as a governmental institution. I'm guessing similar in a scope to the BBC. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's similar.
Okay. All right. And how would you deal with the idea that even if you don't have specific biases where they're not covering people, what if they have differences ideologically amongst their reporters that lead to differences in like the interviews that take place there? So for instance, you might have a situation where a reporter is more sympathetic to one candidate than the other, gives them more softball questions and easier questions to work with there, and does a fluff piece, whereas the other one probably goes a lot harder, maybe even tries to do some digging, maybe has politically advantageous avenues that he can attack him on during a particular debate, just through the use of rhetoric. How does that end up playing out there? Does that just end up getting legislated on, or?
At that point, okay, let me think here real quick. If something like that comes up, that, I guess, journalists would then if there has been hints or it has been proven that there is softball questions or that there's been fluff pieces, those journalists would then either be they would have another candidate they would have to interview, or they would be redistributed around the department, or if it continues, then they would just be cut off, and then they would not be able to produce content.
How do you judge? I'm sorry, I don't necessarily mean to interrupt you here, but I'm really curious. How do you judge the validity of whether or not something's a fluff piece without it becoming inherently political?
I like committees a lot. I was going to say set up another committee just to review it, but I don't think if we continue with that, there'll be too many committees and not enough people to vote.
And you also run into the issue of, even if you do set up committees for them, how do you keep the committees from being politicized and corrupted in the same way that every other office that we've talked about thus far is?
And how do you keep them funded is another question that would arise.
I mean, I try to avoid jumping right into the funding issue because everyone has 1.5 million different ways that they confront that. But personally speaking, just from a system standpoint, I'm not understanding how these reforms will end up just leading to a landslide of reforms, or just end up leading to a bureaucratic version of more of the same, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Man, you're asking these good questions.
Well, I appreciate that.
I guess it would just have to. You would have so you'd have opposing journalists review the content, and
Ideologically opposing journalists?
Yes, and you would also have journalists of the same ideology too, confirming that. Like you would have someone who's far left be reviewed by someone who's not as left, someone who's probably a center right, and then far right, and just to see like how fluffy it is. If like left, center, and right kind of agree that it's not really a fluff piece, then there you go. But if like even the leftist agrees that that is a fluff piece, then it would kind of be, taken to review, possibly not published, or maybe redistributed, or the work has been tweaked a little bit. Well, and just have like this system of checks and balances within it, and being reviewed by people within the committee or the station network.
I understand the concept behind checks and balances there, and it's not that I'm necessarily opposed to that either. I just feel like from a system standpoint, you're still going to run into more issues here. So, for instance, you want to have journalists checking journalists on this one here. How do you account for skill level differences between the journalists that you're dealing with? So, what if it's not a matter of one journalist is trying to write a fluff piece and the other one isn't? But what if one is able to skew it in such a way as to either make it appear one way or the other, just because he knows how the system works? You have people that are going to be more expert at dealing with bureaucracy than others, just based on how much they've worked with it, or various other circumstances as well. So at what point does this just become a tolerated norm, if you know what I mean, or is that an inherent flaw that needs to be dealt with in that situation?
Man, I guess at this point I have to admit some wrongdoings, because there would just be inherent flaws. Like with everything, there will always be a flaw, and I guess at this point that would just be one of the flaws. Like you could have multiple skilled writers try to make sure it's covered, but sooner or later there will be a fluff piece or a one-sided view on a candidate that might get through, or that will get through, and so it's just a flaw that you try to have to deal with as quickly and surely as possible at some point.
And just for the chat here for a moment, because I saw a couple of people asking. Right now, I'm talking to one of the viewers of my channel, Toby. He also has a channel of his own that he's been trying to get started here. So I'll be posting links to that at the end there, so you guys can go check him out. But he's pretty awesome guy, and he agreed to do a debate with me here. He's in favor of mixed economy. I'm more of a very far-reaching socialist / communist type there. So that's what we're currently discussing for anyone that's not currently up to speed.
And he's kicking my butt.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. In all fairness, you've been on the defending side so far because I'm asking you why you're in favor of your system. So that's where you're going to have, the chance to tear everyone apart here. If you want, we can switch gears and, talk about my alternative to the situation here.
Oh, no, it's fine. I don't have any questions whatsoever.
Well, that's also because I haven't had to stand for anything so far, so no worries. The major thing that I see here from a systems level, though, that you're running into with just a mixed economy model is you're still going to have, with the inequities of, income and wealth, you're still going to have all of the pressures to try and further those inequities. So how do you maintain homeostasis within the state of mixed economy without swinging too far towards one end or the other, since you want to have a halt towards movement to either side, it sounds like?
There is currently, I believe, a committee that kind of just deals with the economy as a whole, I believe. Am I correct on that?
In the United States?
Yes.
I mean, they have committees that deal with everything, but it's a matter of, we're talking about your ideal system in this situation here. You claim that you're more in favor of, a mixed economy rather than a socialist or, communist system there. So from that perspective, I'm asking, how do you maintain homeostasis? How do you keep things from swinging too far from one side to the other?
That would just be, in all entirety, that would just actually just have to be up to the government at that point, because I would prefer a more socialist leaning mixed economy, because that's how I just that's how I am, and how
Hmm.
I was talking about the healthcare privatization and all that. It's okay for me if we go a little bit more socialist on it. That though would just require like Congress just being on the lookout, or if there are committees that are set up. Man, I like committees, but if there are committees that are set up, just have them be on the lookout, the president, and just kind of just make sure that it's on the lookout, just to make sure that it's not leaning too far to the capitalist side, because if you go too far capitalist, you have that problem of laissez-faire of like the early 1900s, late 1800s, where the government was just totally hands off, and you have the problem of it might swing back that way, and so
Hmm.
you just need like the government just to be making sure that it is okay, and making sure that it's not leaning too far to capitalistic, but then once again making sure it's not 100% full-blown socialism.
Okay, so here would be my question so far, because we've discussed the inequities that come about from socialism, or not socialism. We discussed the inequities that come about from more capitalistic models there, and the influencing effects of capitalism, and due to our respective ideologies, we're rather in agreement that there are problems with capitalism. Here'd be my question: what are the problems that you perceive from more socialistic models there? Why stop at mixed economy rather than going further?
Okay, so I wouldn't be opposed to a very socialistic style of economy. I believe that it could work and could join with if a very skewed mixed economy scheme. I believe it could work. Um, but I don't believe in a communistic style, because at that point, it's up to the government to make sure the wealth and the income is distributed equally. And at that point, you're putting too much um, you're allowing it to be, as you were saying, heavily influenced and potentially be very corrupt. You're basically giving them a free card almost to allow them to be corrupt.
The
And
government, that is, in this situation?
yes, for a socialistic style economy or communistic style economy.
Okay, so here would be my question. If it's a matter of the government divvying it up in an inappropriate manner, if I'm understanding here correctly, how would you envision this going down? Because you also have to understand, for me in particular, and this might actually be where I have to start taking up my end of the arrangement here rather than just tearing down yours. For me, I don't necessarily agree with the models that were proposed within the Soviet Union and Chinese and Vietnamese and Cuban examples of socialism and communism. I don't think that those were workable or sustainable models in any sense whatsoever. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that they were trying to create militantly egalitarian societies, which is a bit of an oxymoron in its own right there. And they tried to do it going from what basically amounted to agrarian feudal societies all the way to, full socialist or communistic utopias there. And it's like, they can't afford that. They literally can't afford that. They don't have any money. They don't have the wealth, the resources, the technology to be more, specific there. Especially in the case of like Russia or China, the classic examples here. Both of them, serfdom had only been abolished for like what, a couple of decades by the point that you had the Bolsheviks take charge inside of Russia. In China, they still had largely agrarian systems of society there, and I don't think that we've ever been as close to post-scarcity from a technological standpoint as we are today. So from that end there, I would say that, there's a lot of nuances that need to be accounted for. But getting more to your point, when it comes to the idea of government inequities and the distribution inequities from, governmental influence there, my question is, do you think that these inequities would be born of malicious redistribution, as in like as it stands right now, we have redistribution that you could term as just exploitative with how we deal with companies. We give subsidies to ExxonMobil when they're making record profits every year. We're giving blatant bailouts that are just a blank check to Wall Street without any requirements for change there. And I don't think that you're in any more favor of that than I am, right?
You're correct. I hate that, and I believe that there should be more responsibility put into that.
Right. So from that perspective there, if you're approaching it from the opposite end of the spectrum, is that really the wrong side to err on if, some people end up getting a little bit too much on a welfare check?
I honestly don't know at that point. Like, okay, I guess it would be more based on the fact that, okay, if the person needs it, then I believe it is okay, because there are some people who need a little bit more than others. But if it's to someone who is obviously doesn't need it, who obviously is just scamming the system, then no, I don't believe it, and I think they should be jailed, and any financial holdings that they have just be given to someone who is in more need of it. Okay. And put them into, and kind of going along with this, having jails starting to put people to work once again. Like, I can't remember the jail name in Louisiana, but it's a self-sustaining jail where the prisoners work for their food. If they don't work, they go hungry, and so they have to work. So people work in the farms, they work in like clothing, they make their own clothes, they make license plates to get a profit. And if jails kind of switch to that, and then we would be okay off. And if the government kind of just does that, then we'll make sure that the people who need the help to get them back up to above the poverty line will be okay. And so people who need it more, yes, they should get a little bit more because they need it. But if people who are obviously well off, they shouldn't get it, if that makes sense.
To a certain extent, I understand where you're coming from. There are some points that I'd like to make in that respect, though. So when we were discussing the idea of systems here, my basic question was, which one would you rather err on? Because I don't think that we believe that either system is inherently going to be perfect. That's why I spent so much time nitpicking your idea there. The idea is that even in my situation, I'm acknowledging that there are going to be the potential for inequities and corruption within the system. But my question more dwells on which alternative is preferable, because within the model that you provided initially, it sounds like you have a lot of potential for the inequity to swing more towards monopolization of resources and away from the individuals. Whereas it sounds like we both agree that in the worst case scenario, you basically have people abusing welfare on the other side of the spectrum. Is that the worst, from a systems perspective, is that the worst outcome?
And the worst outcome of a mixed economy is that the government. So right now, I guess we have the best current example. So let's say Donald Trump wakes up one morning and has the idea of a mixed economy, which probably in all reality would scare the shit out of everyone. Excuse my language.
I think you could actually go up in the polls at that point, to be honest with you.
Yes. But at that point, he could say, okay, Marriott hotels are bad, government nationalizing all hotels. And so he does that. Well, guess what he owns?
The Marriott hotels?
Yeah. And he would and then he would own it. And he already owns like Trump Towers. So he not only nationalizes all of them, he can basically force them to become part of Trump Towers. So when he leaves office, he has all the hotels. He has a monopoly right there.
And this is your issue with... wait, are you critiquing this from a mixed economy perspective or a more socialistic or communistic perspective?
I don't know, actually. It might be both. It might be one.
Because I'm trying to understand. It sounded like you were trying to rebut my argument there, and I'm not understanding where you went with this.
I'm saying that... I'm just saying, like, the worst aspect is that with that is that if there is someone who blatantly ignores the Constitution and goes into office with businesses, then he has the power to come out even stronger in the business perspective. Even if he puts them into a trust, he still has the power to have the trust gain control over them.
I don't disagree with that. I think that when you have the overlap of, private capital and governance, you're going to run into major issues. But here would be my question. If you have programs like, for example, windfall taxes, and I'm talking extreme stuff here. So if you have windfall taxes and, other elements there that are basically levying and redistributing wealth in order to really clamp down on the accumulation of monopolistic, economic power and then by extension political power, how are you going to be able to monopolize that, further within the systems that you're talking about at that point? So if you have a system where, for instance, you have a government that decides that they're going to nationalize a particular sector, for whatever reason, wouldn't that end up coming about as a result of the common consent and, for the benefit of the population? Because the population will have basically almost, fully egalitarian political rights at that point?
In a perfect society, yes, that would be the reasoning and the background behind it. But that's not always how it is. There'll probably be some people who want just for their own gain, just for their own wealth, and so on and so forth. So there'll always be that aspect to it.
Okay, so now we're getting into some interesting elements here. So you're saying that even in a egalitarian society where you have wealth, fully redistributed, you're still going to have inequities?
Yeah, because
okay,
no matter what, it's in my opinion, it is in the human nature of just give me, give me, give me. Yes, there are people who are charities, but that is in the small. A lot of people are greedy. It's human nature, and they take it. You can look at the Soviet Union. And I know you said these are not true socialistic views of economies.
Well, I didn't say that. I just said I don't agree with those models personally, and I think that there are other ways of handling it. But I do understand where you're coming from.
Well, I'm sorry that I put words in your mouth.
No, it's okay. I wanted to quickly correct that for, since we have people trickling in on, here, I wanted to just set the record straight on that. But please, do go on.
And so you have that, and it's one of those things where it's, oh my goodness, I'm trying to think. Okay, so I was bashing communism.
You were putting forward the idea, if I recall, that within certain models you're going to have inevitable inequities due to human greed.
Oh, yes, thank you.
No problem.
And so you have that, and you look at it, and you can scrutinize it. You can get to the deep knit and gritty. There will always be someone who's wanting to continue to look at it. If you go to a full socialistic, communistic utopia, everyone could be in agreement except for one person. And then he can start to amass the wealth. He can start to take it. And then he could start to bribe people with that extra wealth. And then he could turn those people into, I guess, of a greediest nature, and it can continue. And so, even though, yes, it is 100%, utopic and all, there will always be that greed that someone would have because of human nature. That's one of the reasons why communism, in my opinion, has never worked and might never work, is because unless we come to the point of eugenics, of basically choosing parts of humanity that we want to keep and get rid of, there will always be people who are greedy, who are always looking to make money, and that won't be ever taken out unless we have the power to.
Okay, so here would be my question. Do you think that people are solely the byproduct of their nature, their nurture, in other words, their environment and everything else that goes with that, or some mixture in between? And to what extent of any of that do you think that we can actually control?
I think it's a combination of both. I believe
Okay.
it is nature and nurture.
Mhm.
Nature is their surrounding, I believe, right?
Nurture is their surrounding, as in, their upbringing, the culture that they live in, the education they receive, their parents, their friends. That's all nurture. Meanwhile, nature deals with their biology, their genetics, then the biophysiology that makes them who they are, in that sense.
Thank you.
No problem.
I believe it is mainly nurture, because you have people who grow up in I hate to kind of stereotype and group people.
Uh-huh.
In my experiences, I've seen where the popular kids, the ones who have more money, they're a little bit more greedy. They're a little bit more up, like the nose in the air. Where, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I have the money, and at that point, some of them want more of it. They come into it, but they don't believe it's enough. They want more.
I
So they
apologize. Just as a quick thing here, thank you very much, Nether. That was really awesome of you, and I disagree with your premise, but other than that, thank you. Also,
Oh,
do continue. No,
hold
no,
on,
no.
hold on. What
He's
what happened?
he donated $10 and said communism sucks.
Oh, okay.
And I was
Well,
like, thank you very much for the donation. I disagree with your premise, but please do go on. I just want to acknowledge that there. Hello. Uh, did you crash? I think we might have lost him here, guys. Don't know what happened. Actually, I'm gonna pause this here momentarily. Yeah, he's caught up on the date. Oh, he must have had some issue with his. Wait.
Oh.
Welcome back.
My microphone got barely unplugged to where my headphones would work, but the microphone didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, no worries. Still, welcome back.
Well, thank you.
No problem.
Um,
So, please go ahead where you were.
but so you have the upbringing of the wealthy, and there is always the off chance for them to lose that standing. But at the point that they've achieved the wealth, there's only usually one way to go, and that's up in the wealth, where they accumulate more wealth, and it continues. While other people never have the chance because of how they were born in. So you have the nurture part of being brought up in a very, I guess, wealthy lifestyle and having wealth be around you, compared to the portion where you can always have like a very cherished home, but you were born into a not as wealthy or not as well off house, and it could potentially just be because of your skin color, because there's still that inherent racism that America has and many other countries has as well.
Now, I don't disagree with either premise here, but my question is, wouldn't this change under a more socialistic or communistic society at that point, just by the nature of how economic distribution is handled? And I do try to say both in every situation, because I feel that, first of all, there's a bend from one towards the other, and also because of the fact that there are actual nuanced differences between the two. There is an inherent difference between a fully egalitarian, perfectly redistributed society that, allows for people to engage with each other on a, individual basis with total equality there, and between a socialistic economy that has a focus more towards the egalitarian principles of a communistic utopia. Like, I'm going to be more pragmatic here and just say that, for me personally, I don't see a communist utopia in anyone's lifetimes for the next several generations. But I could see the benefits of a socialistic society moving towards that particular ethical bend, if you know what I mean. Sort of like how I don't think... Oh, sorry, you were just about to say something. I was going to leap right back into it. Go ahead, buddy.
It's fine, but it's like what I'm saying. Like, it's human nature. It's human nature, and it's one of those ingrained things I believe in. That's just ingrained in humans. And go ahead.
Okay, so when you talk about being ingrained, you mean that there's always going to be some element of greed at that point? Is basically the point you're making.
Yes.
Could that greed be mitigated? And what I mean by this is, like, okay, not that I'm necessarily in favor of this. Like I said, I'm more of a, philosophical bend in that case rather than an end point, kind of guy there. But from that perspective, do you think that the effects of greed within an economic premise there could be mitigated by promoting alternative value sets that basically look upon greed as an unfavorable trait there? It actually, as a matter of fact, you have this within Christianity in a lot of respects there, and you do have entire systems with economic contributions revolving around them that directly attempted to combat this particular vice that you're talking about there. you know, the entire idea of charity and such.
I believe that there is the off chance of that happening, but though us getting to the point where that will be taught and that would be necessary, I don't think we'll reach the point. I just think it's one of those things where it's just one of those things where it's a little too hard to really execute fully, because to have people be brought up in a charitous lifestyle, you would need to at one point decide whether or not to ruin someone's life. Because if you have the very well off, you know, you could potentially ruin the childhood. You could potentially ruin their innocence. And so
Just by them being rich, or taking away that wealth? I'm trying to understand. Okay.
Taking away their wealth. Because I'm assuming this, but you're probably thinking more of like a quick counter to this, or a quick change to this.
As a system, in fact, if you want, I can actually delve into what I think would be a reasonable, system here. To be honest with you, I don't think that it necessarily has to be an overnight thing. In this case, I think you can have either a windfall system combined with, basically increases in the estate tax. So you have already the framework as it is to sort of put a damper on the accumulation of further wealth by basically having windfall. So getting above a certain point, you have that income redistributed, and then through the use of the estate tax, where once a person dies, that wealth is then redistributed and reappropriated. You can utilize both these systems in order to basically change the dynamics of generational wealth almost entirely.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Mm-hmm. And just by levying both these systems here and, putting it at different ranges, you can vastly affect the amount of influence that any sort of corporate interest would honestly be able to have. So, and they're not starkly in contrast to anything that we have right now. I think it's actually pretty practicable to do there. You just have to take the existing laws and change it. And people have been proposing a windfall tax for eons. It's not a new idea there either.
You are once again correct on that.
So,
are you? No,
what's
go
up?
ahead.
No. Go ahead. What was your question?
I was just wondering if you were trying to see if I would rebut or counter argue that.
Well, it seems like you felt that the why am I gonna give you a license?
Soviet equipment is better than American equipment.
You're trying to foment revolution in me, you bastard.
The same can be said to you.
As a reaction, you capitalist pig.
Capitalism, guys. It's amazing and wonderful.
But getting back on track there, insofar as the wow, I just lost my train of thought. Oh well, it was worth it. I see your plan now. Gonna win this debate by getting me off track here. No, it's okay. It's part of the game.
No. It's the United Kingdom wouldn't let me use their guns.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Sad. Darned Commonwealth colonialists.
Yeah, they are so colonial at this point in time.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say though? Oh yeah. So if you agree with both those premises though, then why would you have an issue with the system acting as a mechanism against greed? And do you feel that either of those systems are going to inherently destroy the lives of other people?
They have the potential to, because you might have this one person who has a very strong feeling about that, and he might target those people who are more well off than others, and kind of target them and kind of force them to, even though it might be against the wishes of the overall people.
I'm sorry, can you explain that a little bit further? And you're saying that there are certain groups that are going, or certain people that are going to try and push back against the system, or that are going to target the system exclusively towards other groups of people? Am I understanding you right here?
You got the latter correct. There will be focusing it exclusively on a certain type of people,
Okay.
and that could just be. And that's just a number of things why too they could be doing it.
So how would they be able to centralize or gather the authority, legitimacy, or general political power in essence, in order to refocus this authority back onto other people? How is this going to happen?
That is honestly a good question. Um, I guess, like I mentioned earlier, just a very very tough vetting process. You just have to vet them very hard, very crucially, very under a lot of scrutiny, and just you know, once again, just hope that they're the right person. There's just a lot of variables up, and there's a lot of variables to try and counter a lot of this.
Well, that actually leads me to another question. Okay, so we're used to, in a representative democracy, basically passing the buck off to other people. But with the advent of modern, technology here, what's stopping us from further democratizing our democratic process? It's not a new idea. You have on the state level, initiatives, referendums, and recalls for the longest time here, and we haven't seen states devolve into complete and total anarchy from mob rule as a result of these. So why not cross-apply that to the national level at that point in time? When that vastly solve the issues of corruption that we see by passing the buck off to one individual and instead reversing that towards more of a populist form of rule?
I mean, it's just it's a flaw of America, I guess, at this point in time.
What makes you say that?
Well, like you're saying, that mindset of just passing the buck off, like a lot of Americans don't believe that it's their issue or it's something that they shouldn't contribute to, and so forth.
But isn't that the end result of representative democracy to begin with? Like that's what I mean by passing the buck. Like, you elect a representative to govern on your behalf. You're not taking up the mantle for yourself there. You're not personally contributing to the process there. Your voice begins and ends at the ballot box every 2 years. Or every 4 if you're, not that engaged.
And I guess, that's just one of the things where we'll have to, change the American mindset. We would probably have to move to a more, like I was saying, abolish the Electoral College, hopefully, and try to make it more where Americans feel like it is their duty, is their need to do that. Think it. I'm trying to make amends here, Shrew.
We still remember 1918. Sorry, continue, pal.
We don't. But it's just one of those things where the American mindset would just have to change. When it'll be one of those processes where we'll have to just have people just kind of think of it more as their duty and more of their I guess their duty, and just have it where they realize that it's more up to them than just passing it off to someone else.
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the premise that Americans have an issue with responsibility in this sense either. Like, I think that one of the biggest issues leading to lack of participation in our democracy doesn't stem from a lack of desire or a lack of interest, but a disillusion with the entire system as a whole. So you have a system right now where people do have a very limited voice and are made to feel in a lot of senses that their voice is not worthwhile. And it's not that it takes a massive amount of work in order to be able to vote, but it does take work, especially from certain backgrounds there. Just getting registered can be a process. And, after registration, you do have to take time out of your day in order to go over there and vote. And depending on your working circumstances and other elements there, it could be a serious problem. It's not a holiday, so you either have to take the day off from work, which, taking the day off to go vote there, that's its own conversation, or after work you have to go and vote. And we already have situations where people strategically close down polling centers in order to create longer lines in order to dissuade people from voting, and all of this ends up lending itself towards a system across the board that basically makes people feel like their vote isn't legitimate. And it becomes even worse when you realize that under the current system of electoral politics as we have on the presidential level, the most public level, you have states that don't really matter whether or not you vote. You know, there is a feeling, and I disagree with this. I can empirically disprove this, I feel, but there is a feeling that if you vote in New York, LA, California, Texas, a lot of different states across the union, your vote doesn't mean anything because the state's going to go there no matter what.
Like South Carolina, where I'm from.
Yeah, that's you guys have swung pretty solidly for the last several elections there. You know,
Well,
I usually
good.
point to the big. What's up?
I just said, oh goodness, because of it.
Yeah, I usually point to the big three because they've been very solidly one way for some time. But yeah, you're not wrong there. And that's my point is I think if you had more democratic initiatives, and you know, not just as a rhetorical device here, but in general, my fullest belief is if you have more democratic initiatives, such as the actual initiative system where you can have citizen proposed bills and laws, that's something that some states already have. If you have referendums where the legislature can draw up, ideas in order to have them voted on in the public, this is how you had legalization of, marijuana, for instance, in Colorado and many other state-level initiatives or referendums. And recalls where you're able to actually get a guy out of office, before his term is up, you're going to see much more democratic participation.
I agree. Like South Carolina, we do have some referendums, but they're not really all that often. They're more whenever the presidential election happens, or whenever we have a electoral vote for like the Senate or the House. That's when we have the referendums, but we don't have them very often at all.
I understand that, and that basically leads into my point of, especially if you had initiatives, it would end up becoming more prevalent there because that's individual people that are not necessarily elected proposing legislation for everyone to vote on.
I agree.
So yeah, under that system there, wouldn't that help to curb some of the abuses you were talking about earlier? And also increase, participation, so you're less likely to run into situations where you have individuals trying to monopolize power for themselves?
Yeah, you are 100% correct.
Okay. So, under that system, then, what's the advantages of a... I should rephrase this. I don't want to sound like a dick because you've been agreeing with me the whole time, and I appreciate that. If you agree to all that, how do you justify then the maintenance of the capitalistic elements as an end goal for a mixed economy? Because my understanding here is you're in favor of mixed economy as an end state. Like, I'm in favor of socialism as a bend towards a, long-term goal there. So how do you justify maintaining indefinitely the capitalistic elements of that society?
I guess because, oh man, why do you have to be so good? Uh,
Sorry, pal.
it's okay. You make me think, which is really really amazing because I have like these semi debates with my friends and all, and I've never had to think this deep before.
I actually appreciate that.
Man, think. I guess I have it as the end goal is because even though I believe socialism is amazing, it's great and all, there has to be a way to appease the people, and having that there is still a capitalistic area where people can still get rich if they want to, where there's always that American dream still alive, then the people will be okay and they'll be appeased by it. Because if you go full socialistic or even if you go like with a full socialist economy in America,
Hmm.
because of the fear during the Cold War, they're going to call it communist. Like I was called a lot of people. I was in ROTC my freshman and sophomore year, and I was a Bernie supporter.
Uh-huh.
Now a lot of those people like called me a communist and all because A, we're the South, and B, because of the ties of the Cold War, it's so ingrained.
I'm sorry you ran into that, by the way.
It's fine, it's the thing that people have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have that capitalistic way, people won't be too afraid to go with it. There'll be some people who are hesitant, but once they see that it is not like 100% socialist, it's not all, communistic, then they'll be more agreeable to it. Like that's kind of why I prefer that, is because we need government regulation and heavy government intervention in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that the government should have a lot of say in things. But I do believe, though, that there should be a capitalistic side to appease the people who are afraid of it. And also because there are some areas that the government may not need to get involved in.
Interesting. Okay. So here would be my question then at that point. So what keeps you from just saying that your mixed economy model would just be another step towards, a socialistic economy at that point? Because it sounds like, your biggest argument at this point is that people aren't, comfortable in certain areas with the idea of socialism, and as a direct result of that, would not be in favor of it. Now, I'm not necessarily conceding that point, but even assuming it's true for the sake of continuing down this line, wouldn't that just mean that your system is just making people more comfortable with a socialistic model before we can transition to that?
I mean, like once we get to that mixed economy, then the government would just stop, I guess. Just like, okay, we're done, and just come on and say we are done with the nationalization of A, B, C, all the way to Z if there is, or say we are done and have a statement come out and say that they're done, and just kind of not really switch it, not really try to advance it. Now there is that potential where there is a very far left leaning president, aka you might become elected president. I see that happening if
Appreciate
you
your
have
confidence.
aspirations.
That's very kind of you.
It's I think a lot of your supporters could see you running. If not, then don't listen to them. You can.
That's very nice, but I'm a small guy on YouTube with like 2.5k subs. I'm a long way from anything like that. I do appreciate it though. But yeah, do continue.
Real quick, like I was saying earlier, I'm ouchie then compared to you. But it's at that point where where it has the, if there is a far left president, there is always that potential.
Mm-hmm.
And there are always with a very far right president where if they rescind it, it's always this potential. And you look at it, we had Clinton, economy getting better. Then we had Bush, and it kind of faltered. And then we had Obama, and he rebuilt the economy. Now we have Trump doing Trump stuff. I don't know. I'm scared.
There are nuances. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say there are nuances to the story there that I would get into if I was gonna nitpick the situation, but instead I was just gonna more ask, like, okay, so you're saying ultimately that if you implement your mixed economy system, you're essentially acknowledging the fact that with the right political ideology taking control, that it's just not going to remain that, if I'm understanding correctly?
If there is, you are, like, if there is that one candidate who feels like that they have the option to, then they would. And
Okay.
there's always that, uncertainty to the equation.
Okay, because I was going to say, I don't think it's a matter of one candidate either. I think it's a matter of approaching it from a systems perspective here. Like, even just approaching it from the idea of political bends, I feel like if you have a, liberalist bend to you, you're more likely to engage more with, economically leftist issues as you go down the line there. You know, from a political standpoint, as you're still developing your political, identity, it's more likely that you're going to be able to continue progressing in that way in a lot of respects. So if you have a mixed economy where you say that we need more socialistic elements inside the society, because as it stands right now, what you're proposing is further left in the generalist sense, which I usually don't like to do, but left in the generalist sense, that means that you're going to be setting people on a course towards, it sounds to me at the very least, like socialism. And your previous proposal sounded like you wanted to artificially stop that, but now it sounds like you're acknowledging the fact that there could be a further move towards that from there. My question is, do you see that as a good thing if we continue towards a socialistic, is that a desirable outcome if you have a move towards a socialistic outcome, or would that be a flaw in the system for you?
For me personally, I wouldn't really, man. I would see it as a flaw,
Okay.
but at the same time, I would also welcome it. I would say yes, that is a flaw. However, I do believe if the American populace is 100% okay with it, and which probably won't happen, but if the American populace is okay with it, then I would be okay with it as well.
So your opinion would basically come down to whatever the majority believes in that situation you're okay with?
Well, okay, so let's say even if the majority isn't okay with it, I would personally still be okay with it. My fear would be about the government and what will happen.
Okay. So your concern then when it comes to socialism in that respect is still a matter of government interventionism and the abuse of that authority then. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. So what do you think is the most threatening element of government corruption? Like, what do you think is the most identifiable aspect that increases the likelihood that a government will become corrupt? Like, is it, political authority, charisma, financial gain, so economic corruption? What do you think is the biggest threat there?
I think it's economic gains, because I'm he's a really good scapegoat, but Trump.
Okay.
Because he has yet to release his taxes, which is very concerning. He is still basically the runner of Trump Towers. Yes, he may have put it with his sons, but his sons are very closely connected with him and are close advisors to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like if people allow that to happen again, then that's a very big concern, because you have this man who's in power, but he's still closely related to his business. Like I was saying earlier, he could potentially nationalize the hotels and gain more money. Or he could nationalize another business that he has ownership in and put it underneath that control.
Okay, so these are faults in him as an individual, and you're saying that he would leverage that political power, but here would be my question. If you're moving towards more democratic institutions as a result of socialistic pushes there, so you have a distribution of power economically through the distribution of wealth, wouldn't that also entail that you have political redistribution of power as a result? So with these extra democratic reforms, you end up in a situation where people are less able to have one guy just come in and hijack the entire system?
I kind of got a little distracted with that declaration of war there.
Good, it's working. Here, I'll restate it for you if you like. Basically, the idea is if you have an economic system that prioritizes, in essence, redistribution of wealth, and we agree that wealth and income are forms of political leverage, then wouldn't that mean as a result of that you're able to basically push for democratic reforms more successfully, and resulting directly from that, gain a system where people are far less likely to be basically conned in that respect? You say that he might come in and nationalize the hotels when you have to go through some kind of like congressional or even or even more likely, some kind of public consent for that. Some kind of public vote for that kind of system, especially in a technocratically run society where people can just vote at home. You know what I mean?
So committee? Um,
More like a referendum or public, initiative.
okay, but man, that I would depending on how Congress would tailor the law, and depending on who is in power, if when this is supposed to happen,
Hmm.
then yes, that is the kind of the outcome that is most preferred, or that would be most acceptable. But that might not be the outcome we receive. But that is the preferable outcome.
Well, when you say how they tailor the law, like for instance, if we're talking about a situation where again you're distributing wealth, and you have democratic reforms resulting from that, because with the distribution of wealth you have the distribution of political power, and you end up in a situation where the public has to vote on it. Let's even just take Congress out of the equation entirely. You don't have a Congress voting on this. You have, you know, the public voting on this, if that makes sense there. Wouldn't that ultimately act as a check against the kind of authority that you were just talking about there?
Yeah, it would,
Okay.
because the people, have differing views. Some people could see this as a attempt for him to take more power to gain wealth, or whoever's in office. While, but then there might be the majority where they might see if it's necessary. Like, let's say there is like I don't hope this happens, but there could be, a terrorist attack.
Mhm.
And, they could use that as a way to, gain power, or to gain control and gain economic wealth in the name of national security.
Okay, now this is actually a very interesting point that hasn't really been touched on so far here. So you're saying that through the use of false flag operations here, you could end up in a situation where you have a democratic society co-opted through fear. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are, and you can kind of look at America and kind of see where it's happened.
That's a very valid point. So here would be my question. Would you say that it's fair that a lot of the fear that was resulting from the latest, the rounds of terrorist attacks that we sort of ran into there, would it be fair to say that a lot of that was propagated by media, in essence?
Having the increased fear and how. Okay, so I don't. Have you kind of kept up with the shooting that happened in Knoxville at the Waffle House?
I'll be honest with you. There have been so many shootings over the past couple of years. I've been slowly losing track. So I think I know the one you're talking about, but I can't be 100% sure.
Okay, and I do agree. Sad to say, it's becoming the norm of America, and they're all starting to blend in together with each other.
It's
But,
really bad.
But that one, basically, where a guy had a gun and he fired into the Waffle House. That's
Oh,
the
was he
gist
the one
of
that
it.
was bare ass naked?
Yes,
Okay, yes, I do know the one you're talking about.
yes. That's not. I'm sorry that I kind of laughed. That's
No,
the-
it's depressing, but
it's
amusingly depressing. It's,
sad to say. Yeah.
yeah, if you're gonna have to be forced to deal with this here, then yeah, at least he was dumb enough to go in bare ass naked before shooting up everyone there. There's no upside to this. All right, continue.
Yeah. But he had a gun.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an assault rifle. However, the guy there was calling it an assault rifle. And the media has kind of propagated that any shooting that takes place has to have an assault rifle, or the weapon being used is an assault rifle. And it
Okay.
has kind of created that, where, and now it's kind of, depending on how you view it, if you're pro, gun laws, it's trying to convince the populace, yes, we need more gun control. Where if you're anti gun control, then it's just a leftist attempt to try and take your guns away.
Okay, interesting. So then that actually leads back directly to my point there, which was that if we can agree that a lot of the fear that you have from these kinds of attacks is played off of by the media in essence, especially because it functions as a profit-driven device there, a profit-driven mechanism where by promoting a narrative of fear, they're able to gain additional ratings, because they draw more people's attention because they're afraid. Wouldn't basically taking the profit motive out of that equation undermine the fear element of the entire situation, and as a result of that, in turn lead to a less of a likelihood that fear could be leveraged as a political tool? Especially since the mode of distribution for that fear would not be, having it wouldn't have any real mechanism or incentive to drive that narrative.
It has the potential, but once again, it kind of comes down on how well tailored and how well or how bad the attack was.
So you're saying severity would be the issue here, as in the more destructive a particular attack is, the greater the likelihood that it could be leveraged into a device in order to basically take away someone's freedoms and undermine the entire process here, regardless of the economic system in place.
Yes, that is a potential that could happen.
Okay. Interesting. So, and this is irrespective of the mode of distribution for this particular attack that's taking place here. In other words, if you have the media talking about it or not, it's going to be a matter of the size and scale and scope of a particular attack that's going to determine whether or not it's something that's going to cause issues that would undermine the democratic system, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just taking a moment to think this over here, especially since I'm still in the middle of the war here.
Okay.
No, that's all good.
I'm going to be nice. I stopped influencing you.
That's far too kind. Don't worry about it. I'm still influencing you, so feel free to continue. Let's see here. And just to answer something in the chat here, no, I do not believe in killing people and stealing their stuff. I actually put up my political affiliation test or whatever it was there in the Discord chat if anyone wants to check that out. According to the website that people were tossing around there, I'm apparently a libertarian socialist. So, whatever that entails. And to answer your question... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. Is it the... Which one is it? Is it the one with, the 4 squares? And...
Yeah, you have the 4 bars that go back and forth, yeah. I personally identify as a neo-Marxist, and that's what I've basically done for most of my adult life there. But, I can understand where there's a lot of nuance that goes with that position, so it's just a lot easier to say, here's what this thing said. No worries. But yeah, insofar as the idea that even with... oh, wow, why did I get paused? Even with the lack of economic incentive to drive a fear narrative, you could potentially end up in a cataclysmic event that would basically alter the democratic landscape there. My question would be, isn't this a flaw in pretty much any system that's not... No, even any system. You could use this in a dictatorship, you could utilize it in a representative democracy. Isn't this just an issue that transcends any one particular system at that point?
Yeah, it is, because we can look at the crises that happened in, Cuba. That's even though it's not like you said, it's, in your opinion, the ideal one, you can still look at it and see that, crises that happened helped Castro solidify his power. You can look at the Soviet Union and Communist China, even the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. They've used that to solidify their position.
And I'm not necessarily inherently disagreeing with any of these positions. I do feel there's a fair bit of nuance that I'm sure there's a few people out there that would, love if I went into on those particular situations. But even without that, basically the point that I'm making is that irregardless of the system or the actors, the idea of fear undermining a democracy seems to be an inherent risk. It just seems to me, at the very least, that in this case it's more prudent to, argue rather that it wouldn't happen. It seems less likely. You would need an absolutely cataclysmic event in order to really prove your point at that point in time, it sounds like. Because you've already conceded that, at least I should say it sounds like you've conceded that without the economic incentives there, it's far less likely that you have a fear-driven narrative within media, and that seems to be a large part of what's pushing fear in the current environment that we have. Like, do you disagree with any of that so far?
I do not. And oh, poor Finland. Poor Finland.
Absolutely. So, if you agree with that, then it sounds like what would be the critique then at that point of a more socialistic bend in the system there?
What do you mean by that?
All right, so like I said, my argument from the get-go is that I push for a socialistic bend in policy. So it's not that I think that we're going to create a communist utopia in anyone's lifetime here, for like many, 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 many generations. I prefer actually to generally say at all, because I do think that's more of a utopian society than anything. But I do agree that that is the general societal bend that we should be working towards. In other words, working towards policies that will have the effects that would come about from having more socialistic leaning there and continuing down that path, as far as we are able to as a society from a pragmatic and coherent standpoint. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I agree.
So from that perspective there, I don't understand why stop at a mixed economy, which is basically the formation of the entire debate here that we've been having is why stop at a mixed economy rather than continuing on to a more and more socialistic bend? Why mandate the keeping of capitalism?
In all of the personal discussions I've had with people, and they've never been as deep or as intense as this has been.
I appreciate
But,
that.
no problem. It's the truth, 100%. It's like they are always hesitant of socialism. They're always hesitant of that one extra step, and for many conservatives, I believe that they share somewhat of the same standpoint. They don't want to go the full step or that extra mile, and so it's one of those ways to kind of appease them. And another way to look at it too is that it's it's always there to have the American dream, and it always has that opportunity for people who want to become rich. They have that opportunity to become rich.
All right, but what's the value to them becoming rich? As a societal benefit, what's the value to them becoming rich?
It's for them to push and advance the technological developments or the changes of society, because you can look at it now. This is something I've heard like more as a joke or just like one of those regular old usages, and it's probably vastly wrong. Correct me if it is, but it's like the Soviet Union. You could have this amazing toilet paper, but it'll just be the same amount. It'll cost the same amount as the bad one. So why not just have it be made poorly so that way you get the most out of it?
Well, before I go into that, because I don't necessarily agree with the premise that you're putting forward here, which is that by having no difference in what would you call it? Having no economic inherent benefit, which again, you could say that that's a structural standpoint there, but having no economic inherent benefit to your actions there would lead to a degradation of quality. Let me flip that on its head for a moment and say, are you basically claiming that inequality in this case, is the only way to spur development?
It's not the only way to spur development, but it is a great factor in spurring development.
All right. I I don't want to sound glib on this one here, but if that's the case, then why isn't Somalia like one of the most technologically advanced countries on the planet?
One of the reasons why is okay, so look at China in the past. China was owned by warlords, and they were very divided up and cohesive, and there was not really, as far as my knowledge, you probably have more, but it wasn't really a center of like technological advancements or development. And we can look at Somalia because currently Somalia is very much like that. There's a civil war going on. There's a lot of warlords. There's a lot of proxy states.
Okay, but
And
let's then. Sorry, I hate to cut you off here. Let's then substitute that with a stable but poor country. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, for instance, let's say that you, just off the top of my head, Brazil. Why isn't Brazil the leading technological, factor in the world? Technologically, why isn't it a massive technocracy where the inequality has basically spurred development to such a point where they have some of the best stuff on the planet? You know what I mean?
There's two. I would say I'll put forth two reasons. There's a lot more, but one is because of the corruption in the government, which is very prevalent and rampant, and the other one is due to their former, former colonial status, which was very focused on exploitation, and even when they gained their independence, they never really recovered from that.
Okay, so let's dive into that though. If the argument here is that inequality is the breeding ground of innovation, wouldn't colonialism expand their inequality and lead to a correlate or causative effect, you could argue, of as a result of having even greater inequality from having their wealth and everything else extracted, they'd have even more innovation from having to get around all that?
Not necessarily, because it depends on how, I guess, deep of the exploitation it was. We can look at Africa, and besides South Africa, namely, most of the countries there were riddled with very large exploitation of the populace and very rampant and biasm and all that. South Africa, not so much, just because of how they became, because of their status of moving in, where they were more or less had their own political government structure set up before the big scramble of Africa or right after the scramble had happened. So they weren't truly as affected. But you look at it, a lot of other countries were greatly affected because of this, and because of that, they are limited and they are trying to catch up and overcome it.
But you're saying this as though the colonialism put them behind. Isn't one of the advantages to, basically I'm putting forward the argument that if you have income inequality being a driver of innovation, wouldn't that inherently drive more innovation in more unequal societies? That's the basic argument I'm putting forward. So from that perspective, it leads to the logical extreme of why aren't these ridiculously poor countries some of the best countries on the planet?
It's because of their. I would say that it's because of access to resources. They don't have an abundant access to resources. Unlike America, yes, the country overall is wealthy, but you have some of the poorer aspects of society and the public becoming wealthy because they have that access to the resources that they need. Some of these countries like Brazil and I don't know, in yeah, India, some of those, yeah, they don't have the access
So
to
this
those
is
resources.
this is interesting because wouldn't you define resources as a form of wealth?
Ooh, goodness.
I mean, if you have gold, that's considered wealth, right?
Yeah, going to like the most basic, I guess, principle of wealth. Yes, because they have something that you do not. Like a caveman, no, not a caveman, like tribes that had access to, like fertile land, they were wealthier than tribes that didn't, and so wars were fought over it.
Well, and not only that, but even if you just classify it within the classical understanding as we understand today, wealth can also take the form of investments, and raw materials are, in many cases, an investment. People speculate on gold. People speculate on all kinds of other things there, and that wealth is transferable into currency form as well. Not wealth; those resources are transferable into a currency form as well. So that leads me into the perspective from there of if you have countries that are resource wealthy like the United States and also have a history of colonialism that deprives the wealth of other countries, Great Britain and others were famous for this, and it leads to an uneven playing field from that respect because you have inequality in those situations. Why is it, if inequality is the major driver, that the richest countries have the most technological innovation?
Because even though it might be the inequality between the rich and the poor that may drive, there's always the competition between the rich to be even richer, which will also spur the development and the progression of technology and other advancements.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood your argument there. Can I trouble you to restate that?
Uh, okay, so basically, yes, some development comes from the gap between the rich and the poor. The
Mm-hmm.
poor want to become rich. There is some of that development. However, there's also development between the rich wanting to become richer, like the competition between Apple and Microsoft,
Right.
because you have the advancements between those two trying to be superior than the other, and it shows the advancement because the other party wants to become richer. Like party A wants to become richer than party B, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, let me switch gears for a second and try approaching this from a different perspective here. Would you say that wealth and education have an inherent link between them?
Yes, they do.
And would you say that education is a major factor in developing technological innovation?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, so from that perspective, then, looking at it that way, why is it if if inequality is a driver of innovation, that if you have the least educated parts of society being also the least equitable at that point, the ones with the most inequality, especially on a wealth and income level, why is it they're considered the drivers of innovation? Especially when you look at it from a precedence level where you have gents like, Bill Gates, trying to think of other gents here off the top of my head, Mark Zuckerberg, some of the biggest tech companies that we have inside of the 21st century here are people that come from, even if not wealthy, at least middle class backgrounds, not the poorest elements of society.
It's because they had access to the resources. They had access to that. They had the access to the wealth.
Agreed.
Because the wealth can also be, you can be seen that like the banks are the wealthiest because they have the access to the money.
Mm-hmm.
So they had access to that wealth. They had access to the resources. And so it's and also too, the the wealth gap doesn't just mean the poorest of the poor or just the poor. It can also mean between the middle class, because you have the like variable different levels of the middle class within itself. And
No,
so
that's true.
and so you can show, hey, yes, he's middle class, but he wants to achieve the true American dream of the greatest financial security possible and be rich.
Okay. Like I said, I understand where you're coming from here. It's just, I find it difficult to reconcile the idea that you have inequality being the driver of innovation when all the resources that allow for innovation to take place are increasingly, centralized into the higher elements of society, and we see the net results of that being more innovation coming from the top rather than the bottom. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's my position. And by the way, I do apologize here. I'm gonna have to wrap this up. But my question is, do you have any final statements on things here in order to defend your idea of the mixed economy?
Well, not really, because you actually brought up some very valid points, and you really question how I viewed it and all. And I have to say, that I have really no counter arguments to it, except for that in certain societies, namely America, we cannot go 100% over to a socialistic economy of that, or somewhere close to Sweden or the Nordic, just because of the people. They always want a safeguard, and a mixed economy is the best safeguard that we can offer them.
Okay, so from that perspective, I will say, by the way, it's been a pleasure debating with you here, and you're incredibly intelligent. I definitely appreciated getting the chance to talk with you here, and even though I don't necessarily agree with the outcomes that you've come to in terms of sticking with a mixed economy, I don't think that your plan is inherently flawed here, and I think that with some development there, you'd be able to more than counter the arguments. Like I also know that there were some rhetorical devices I used in the debate there that could be argued against, and I also know that there are flaws in the arguments I put forward. So I'm sure that upon some reflection there, you'll be able to, strengthen the arguments that you have. So if you ever have to debate one with this in the future, you'll be better able to.
Thank you, and you're also very highly intelligent yourself, and you gave me a lot of questions where I had to stop and think about.
Appreciate that. So, gonna have to wrap it up here, pal, and I'm just gonna do an outro with my audience here. So, thank you again for talking, and I'll see you on the Discord, okay?
All right, man. Take care.
You too, pal. Okay, so just to talk to you guys here for a second, I'm looking to do more of these going forward. I really enjoy the chance to talk to people generally, and I'm glad that he was able to come in as one of the first people to really talk with me about his views on these particular things here. I'm up to talk about pretty much anything, so if you guys want, feel free to hop in my Discord and private message me. You can tell me what it is you'd be interested in talking about and what kind of days you have available for it. I'm trying to go for Sundays in order to schedule these. I can't guarantee it's going to be every Sunday, and I can't guarantee that it's going to happen at a regular basis, but I'd love to do it as often as possible. So thank you everyone for checking this out. I hope you enjoy. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all later. Have a wonderful day, everybody.